Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
Welcome to On the Middle East, Al Monitor's podcast on the big and interesting developments in the region. My name is Amran Zaman, and today I'll be discussing the dramatic events that unfolded last week in Sulaymaniyah, the stronghold of the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan, or PUK, an Iraqi Kurdish party that shares power in the Kurdistan regional government of Iraq. What happened was that the PUK leader Bafel Talabani raided the headquarters of his cousin and longtime rival Lahur Talabani, leading to a violent showdown that sent shockwaves across the region. At least 4 people died in the ensuing clashes, and Lahur Talabani was arrested on the grounds that he was seeking to overthrow Bafel in a coup. With us here to discuss these events and what they mean for the future of Iraqi Kurdistan is Shayan Talabany, a geopolitical analyst at the Tony Blair Institute in London. Full disclosure, Shayan is the daughter of Lahur Talabany's brother. However, as you will observe in the following conversation, she's an independent professional who does not mix family allegiances with her work. So welcome to our program, Shayan. It's really great to have you on with us here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Amberin. Thank you.
So Shayan, some rather dramatic developments have unfolded over the past week in Iraqi Kurdistan, and it just feels a bit like Groundhog Day, these endless factional feuds. And it's all very unfortunate because, surely it's very destabilizing, bad reputationally. Can you kind of unpack what just happened and why it happened?
So that's the million-dollar question, I guess, Amberin. But no, but you're right. I think you captured it quite well in that this is, in a sense, it's not something new. So we had these events on the night of the 21st of August, which saw a large mobilization of tanks, of military materials in Sulaymaniyah, which is, it's not even the capital of the KRG. We saw this, what has been, I think, described as sort of factional infighting, and perhaps even familial infighting. But in fact, I think there's a much larger sort of political framing to all of this and why it's happening now. So, of course, the events didn't really begin on the 21st. They began 4 years ago, and they began in July 2021, where we saw the first instance of this kind of infighting between Bafel Talabani and Lahur Talabani, the cousins who have played, the most prominent role in the Patriotic Union of Kurdistan in Sulaymaniyah, in the so-called green zone, as they call it. And 4 years ago, what we saw was that Lahur was effectively, he was pushed out of the PUK. He was at the time the co-chair of the PUK alongside his cousin Bafel, but there was an internal coup, as people described it, which saw Lahur sidelined. And since then, there has been this sense that perhaps, there's been this question mark, actually, over what's going to happen next. What will happen? What's the future of Lahur? What is the future of the PUK? And in the last regional Kurdish elections, Lahur decided to participate in the political, electoral system within the framework of his own party, within the framework of a new party, and engage in opposition politics. So he joined, I suppose, what is the formal opposition in a way in Kurdistan, in the Kurdistan region. So really, I think that people generally, many analysts felt, or those who follow it, and people within the Kurdish region in Iraq, they felt that this was kind of heading into perhaps a situation where things were actually calming down. What's actually happened is I think the party has become more fragmented. And of course, those long-standing members of the party are sort of looking around, or have been looking around for the last 4 years, thinking, well, where's our future? Where's our stake in the politics of the PUK and in the party? And how can we sort of salvage, actually, the PUK? And how can we also retain our own centers of influence and power and control? But at the same time, there's also in a sense, there's a new generation, I would say, maybe. And they are sort of lesser known, younger generation. And many of them actually operate around Bafel Talabani. And in a weird way, this could set a very dangerous precedent, and we can talk about that a bit later, for the wider region and for Iraq and for the Kurdish region.
What exactly are you saying?
I'm saying that there are people around him. So one of the gentlemen who was kind of involved with all of this, who goes by the name Wahab, who was very heavily involved in this operation, and who previously worked for Lahur Talabani, and then with the coup sided with Bafel Talabani. I mean, he's someone that nobody's really talking about at this point, but he played a very prominent role in all of this, both in 2021 and since then. And I think what we might see is even further fragmentation of the PUK, to the point that maybe right now Bafel feels that he's the winner. And perhaps he is. But I think he's set a dangerous precedent in the sense of how you can take power, and how you can sort of, in a sort of Machiavellian sense, how you can push out your rivals.
Oh,
And
you
I
mean
think,
by co-opting their sort of loyalists and converting them to your cause, recruiting them? Is that what
yes,
you're saying?
yes, and I think that that generation below him, or that sort of that leadership just below him, who he's heavily relied on, I don't think that they are necessarily politically loyal to the PUK, and nor are they politically loyal to him as a sort of cult of personality. I think they are power hungry and they are ambitious. And so what you may see is that actually this is just the beginning of a sort of, or it's kind of the first knock in a domino effect of the increased disintegration of parties like the PUK, who have been around really since the beginning of Iraqi Kurdish politics in the contemporary sense.
You mentioned the broader region. Could you tell us a bit about how Iraq's neighbors are involved or not in all of this drama?
4 years ago, when the original kind of coup happened, the internal coup, I kind of called it the tale of two Suleymanis, because it was the sort of post General Qasem Soleimani era in the wider region. And it's no secret that, of course, many of the groups inside Iraqi Kurdistan have some form of a relationship with Iran, with Turkey, with regional actors, given the sort of positionality of the Iraqi Kurdistan and where it sits strategically in the region. But the role of Iran, I think, is really critical, given the pre-election, given that we are heading towards elections in Iraq in November, and with the wider or the backdrop of Iran's positioning in the wider Middle East, and the losses, I suppose, it experienced both in Lebanon, in Syria, of course, and Iraq and Iraqi Kurdistan is also very much a part of that and its thinking. I think for many years, Iran has felt that it's sort of been encircled in a way in its region. And the events of the last few years have kind of been a catalyst really after October 7th, that was the sort of catalyst for many of these trends to almost accelerate. So Iran finds itself in a very interesting position. And in a way, given its relationship with the PUK and other actors, also the KDP, but in a different sense within Iraqi Kurdistan, it may also see this as a way to kind of double down on really tapping into, and that's what the Iranians, I suppose, do best, but tapping into fragmentation. And in a way, this really serves Iran to an extent because this area of Suleimania is really critical to it, both when it comes to the Kurdish opposition in Iran, who have traditionally used that border, who have been just across the other side of the border with Iran in Suleimania, but also Suleimania as a critical border region for Iranian goods, perhaps for Iranian money laundering and for all sorts of other activities. So this is a strategic area for Iran. And I think it's sort of looking around, perhaps thinking, well, when will be the next conflict even with Israel? And also, where does Iran fit in the future of Iraq ahead of the elections, where it feels or it senses that maybe it's being pushed back a little bit?
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al Monitor to follow what leaders and decision makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25 for a discount.
Well, a question that's preying on many minds is, whose side was Iran in this fight?
So the reason I called it the tale of two Suleimanis is because I think that for many years, what the Iranians did was they didn't really take a side. They sort of always engaged with everyone, right? That was what it was. They engaged with this multitude of actors, and really what they did in many ways is they almost kept a lid on things. They managed the different relationships and they utilized the management even of those relationships to their benefit. We're here, we bring you together, we sort of we convene you and we make sure that this doesn't destabilize the region and doesn't go against our interest and yours. In the post-Soleimani era, when this coup happened, I almost saw it as the kind of beginning, in a way, of a wider trend in the region, where there was some strategic mistakes, in a sense. If you were Iran, if you're viewing it from Iran's perspective, I think that they supported the coup that happened within the PUK 4 years ago in support of Bafel Talabani, because they perhaps didn't see Lahore as someone who was a partner. I think that was again, like a post-Soleimani, perhaps error of judgment, whereas his approach was always, we need to keep all of these different actors engaged to some extent. Maybe we support one over the other temporarily, but we never really let it get to this point of destabilization. So this was a kind of new approach, I suppose, by the Iranians, maybe because they had less capacity, maybe because they had less of the skill to be able to manage these different networks. But this time around, it seems that in a similar way, they are working with what they've got, which is they have an empowered side of, or they have an empowered Bafel Talabani in the PUK. And I don't think that they see Lahore as an ally. I think they see him perhaps much more closer to the United States, perhaps to other regional actors, and maybe even as part of a wider, a much bigger than Lahore network of actors, political actors inside Iraq, who may be trying to actually push out Iranian influence in Iraq, or balance it more, maybe is the right way to say it. And so it seems that they're probably on side. But the thing with the Iranians, on side with Bafel, but the thing with the Iranians is they don't necessarily instigate these things, right? It takes the local political actors to really instigate this. And I think the responsibility lies with the local actors who instigated this.
But just to be fair, I mean, Lahur Talabani has also engaged extensively with Iran. Let's not, sort of frame him as a pro-Western, pro-American actor per se. I think his positions have shifted quite cynically, in fact, as they have for many of the actors in Iraqi Kurdistan. Let's talk a bit about how, the KRG has failed to institutionalize, and still today, well, we first have these two groups, the PUK and the KDP, who have failed to merge their forces, and it's been decades now. But at the same time, as you point out, there are now the sort of factions emerging within the parties themselves, the familial feuds, but you've just added a new layer of complexity here to this by calling our attention to the emergence of these other players who sound, as you said, power hungry, Machiavellian, and not necessarily motivated by any ideals.
My view on this is that it's a really dangerous moment in a sense. It's sort of an inflection point, I think, for the KRG. And it's been a long time coming, right? It's a sort of long time reckoning with where the KRG and where the Kurdistan region of Iraq is in the framework of Iraq and in the framework of the wider region. It is, in a sense, a failure of all sides, because, of course, this mobilization was neither conducted by the official Kurdish government, nor was it conducted by the Iraqi government. This was the leader of a political party. So it is a really, I suppose, very frankly, in kind of non-diplomatic terms, it's a really bad look for the Kurds, right? It's a really bad look. And it kind of proves or goes to show that actually what you've invested in us thus far, and we've been around since 92. The Kurdish region is older than the Iraqi state, the modern, well, not the Iraqi state, but the contemporary Iraqi constitution even. So we've been around since 92, and we haven't managed to unpack or unravel these tribal conflicts, these familial conflicts. We have not managed to integrate into one unified Peshmerga or one unified military force. And I'm afraid, I think if we continue as is, and if the current leadership, and that goes for both the former government leadership, but also the smaller players, the political party players like Bafel, like Lahore, like everybody else who's been involved, but also in Erbil and with the KDP, then they may end up kind of losing everything that they've built. Particularly as you see around the region, but also in Iraq itself, a kind of reassertion of the Iraqi state. So the Iraqi state is now sort of, it's the stronger player, whereas it used to be, Iraq and the other Iraq, which was the Kurdish region of Iraq, and the West and the United States in particular, but Europe and many others invested a lot into really trying to make that part of Iraq a success story. But really, the reality of what's happened for the last 30 years in Iraqi Kurdistan is that everything has just been as it is. Nothing has really evolved. Nothing has really morphed. And we're kind of in the same situation, if not perhaps a worse situation, a much worse situation than we were in the 90s or in the early 2000s. That's for certain.
Shayan, thank you so very much for joining us here today. Our faith in the Kurds remains unshaken nonetheless, and hopefully to better days and to more happy conversations with you.
Thank you, Amberine. Thank you so much.
Well, this brings us to the end of another episode of On the Middle East. Thanks for tuning in, and for more in-depth and independent reporting on the region, go to our website www.al-monitor.com. Goodbye.